Hi, AP World students. I wanted to provide you with some clarification on the shower curtain review that you're going to be working on over the next month. What is it? Why are you doing it? And how do you approach it? It's no easy task to learn the enormous amount of material that's required for this course. And even when you've done everything right and worked hard all year, it can be incredibly overwhelming to try to figure out how you want to approach your review. Rather than having you guys spend any unnecessary energy worrying about what to do, I've made a decision that will allow you to channel all of that energy into one productive activity. You're going to create a shower curtain review chart. This is from a previous year, but you can see from these photos a general idea. The goal of this is to review for the AP test by thinking about, organizing, and handwriting the history that we've learned so far this year. You want to reorganize the content in a meaningful and condensed way. You'll be charting the content using the materials that are most helpful to you in a way that is most meaningful to you. This project will serve as both an assessment and a review activity. You will be creating a giant review chart by filling an entire shower curtain with accurate historical content. This will allow you to visualize much of what you've learned in one place. By working on this project, you will be engaging in active, meaningful review every day. When you are doing the organizing of content and you are doing the writing of content, you are doing the thinking. If you don't believe me, let's hear it from Heimler.
This is Jerry Jung, and in 2021, this guy earned a perfect score on his APUSH exam. And he was one of only 6 students out of 400,000 who took this exam to get a perfect score. So I bet you wouldn't mind knowing Jerry's secret sauce for remembering everything he learned. And it's not what you think. He's not just a genius who can flip through a book and instantly know everything. He worked incredibly hard for that score, and he used a study method that mere mortals like us can use too. It's not complicated, you just have to do it. If you adopt this method, you can get the score that you want on your AP exam. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, let's get to it. Now, before I tell you what the method is, I need to tell you why it works, because if you understand the why, then you're more likely to put this method to use. Now, so the way the brain learns anything is by creating what are known as neural pathways. You got all these neurons in your brain and they communicate with each other. When you attempt to learn something new, it's like these two nerve endings are speaking different languages, and so the neural connection is weak. So the first time you try to learn the Monroe Doctrine or the Khmer Empire or Renaissance humanism, these two guys are not understanding each other. Monroe Doctrine? What you talking about, Willis? But the more you force these two foreign neurons to interact, the more they begin to understand each other and speak the same language. Or switch the metaphor. When you start to learn something new, it's like you're being plunged into a thick forest without any path to get from point A to point B. The more you study using this method I'm about to show you, the more of a path is formed. And as you continue to study, trees start to get taken down and the path widens, and then even more study leads to a full-blown paved road between these 2 points. And if you have this running through your brain, then you will remember dang near everything you study. Okay, so that's how it works. Now let me show you the method that will create this strong path in your brain. So the method to actually remember everything you study is called active recall. And there's a mountain of science to back this up, so listen up. This could change everything for you. And here I'm just going to talk about the method. Next week, I'm going to publish a video that will tell you exactly what content you need to know for your exam and what content you forget. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. Now, think about how a typical student studies. You got an exam coming up and there's a metric buttload of information you need to remember. So what do? Well, most students will read their notes or look over a textbook or watch a bald, bearded, gap-toothed man flap his mouth hole on a YouTube video or something like that. And you're putting some work in, so it feels like learning. But to paraphrase the great philosopher Ted Lasso, I hate to tinkle on your toenails, but that ain't learning. And you know this because when you show up to that exam, all that information that's just barely hanging on in your brain falls into the abyss as soon as you get to that first question. It's because you haven't actually created that pathway through the woods by cramming. Now, look, I've been doing this a long time. I know exactly the kind of comments I'm going to get below. At ToeFlosser73 is going to say, all I did was binge your videos the night before the exam and I got a 4. And hey, that's great. Who am I to judge? But I'd be willing to wager that there was an awful lot more behind that score than just a few hours of binge watching. Like you had a good teacher, you've been practicing all year, etc., etc. But look, even if not, I'm not here to force you into anything. I'm just trying to persuade you that the method I'm about to show you works 100%. So active recall is the process by which you force your brain to recall the information you wish to master. And here's how you do it. Step 1, read or watch a single bit of information that you need to know. Now, step 2, reformulate that information in your own words. This is the step almost nobody takes, but this is the place where everything changes in your brain. At this point, close your notes or pause the video or whatever and say that information in your own words. And there are 3 ways to do this, and each is better than the last. First, just do it in your mind. Second, say it out loud, which is even better. Third, and best, is to write it out by hand. Again, lots of research about how writing by hand helps with recall. Now listen, the first time you try to reformulate that information in your own words, you're not going to do very well. What you talking about, Willis? It's going to feel very difficult, and that means you're doing it right. But you can't quit at that point, because what's happening in that difficulty is that initial contact has been made between those 2 neurons that will be responsible responsible for remembering that bit of information. And that initial contact takes a lot of energy. So then go back to the information and watch it again or read it again, and then try to reformulate it in your own words again. And the more you do this, the more those neurons communicate and the wider the path becomes. And once you can articulate that information in your own words without looking at the source material, you've got it. If you can do that a little bit every day between now and exam day, you'll be on your way to Five-Town, baby. And this is exactly what our boy Jerry did. His studying strategy relied on brief sessions of study and frequent reviewing. You know what that's called? Active recall. Now, I know this sounds like it's going to take way more time than the kind of studying you're used to, and ain't nobody got that kind of time. But listen, you're already going to spend some time studying, and if that time is spent cramming all at once instead of practicing active recall, then those are really just wasted hours. And if you don't believe me, let Jerry tell you. He said cramming is not only insanely inefficient, but it also means that you retain information briefly, so you may as well not have studied it all.
So Heimler is emphasizing the same thing that I've told you all year. You need to be able to reorganize content in a meaningful and condensed way, forcing your brain to engage in retrieval practice, recalling the content, and allowing you to see whether or not you really understand it. If you can't look away from the reading and explain what you just read, then you got to read it again. The process of creating the shower curtain is more important than the actual product. It's not about how beautiful it looks or how pretty the writing is. It's about the process, the time that went into it, and the thought that went into considering that historical content. Please make sure that you understand the goal. If you aren't gaining better understanding of the content by actively thinking and writing about it while you're doing the shower curtain, then you're doing it wrong. So if it feels like it's not effective review for you, then talk to me and let's figure out why. Now, keep in mind that this is an individual assignment. Any copied shower curtains will result in a 0 with no chance to resubmit. They'll also defeat the entire purpose of doing the shower curtain because the process is more important than the product. If it's hard to stay motivated, keep in mind that 100% of students said last year that this activity helped them prepare for the AP exam and the final exam. Okay, so what materials do you need? First, you need the shower curtain liner. You can get that from me. Secondly, you need permanent markers. Test these to make sure that they don't smear. If you're looking at the set of written instructions, the first 2 steps are just to get those materials. Number 1, get your shower curtain, and number 2, test your markers and make sure that they aren't going to make a mess. Step 3 is to locate the written instructions and be intent on following them. Keep following them over the next month. Do not just wing it and hope for the best. If you do this wrong, you'll lose points or you may not get any at all. The next step is to divide your shower curtain. You need 4 boxes with a small circle in the middle. The way that I did this is by folding my shower curtain into quarters, and then I made a little mark right here at the end just so I could see where the center was. I opened it up and I drew my lines. Now, don't worry if your lines aren't perfectly straight, but make sure that the boxes are somewhat equal size and that the circle in the middle doesn't take up your entire shower curtain. Step 5 is simple. Just inside that circle, write AP World History 2023 along with your first and last name. Remember, there's no perfect way to do this. You don't have time to make this an artistic masterpiece. It should be legible and accurate, but don't expend too much energy on the artistic aspect of the curtain. That being said, if you want to be a little creative, feel free. The next thing you'll do is title each of the boxes. The top left box should have the title pre-1450. The top right box should include the title 1450 to 1750. The bottom left box should include the title 1750 to 1900, and the bottom right box should include the title 1900 to present. So you can see here that I did that with each of these. You can write this title wherever you'd like, on the sides, in the center, wherever, doesn't matter, as long as it's legible. Now, at this point, you should bring your shower curtain to me to have me sign it. This is a mandatory step and must be done in the first few days of working on this assignment. Please note that if there's no signature from me that was acquired at this particular time, you cannot submit this assignment for any points. So do not skip this step. If you get started on the 20th century, that's okay, but there should be no other writing in any other time period when I provide you with my signature. If you come to me with a shower curtain that has writing in any of the other 3 time period sections, I will have you restart. Now it's time to start filling your shower curtain completely. If you look at the written instructions, you'll notice that there's a page of instructions for every single time period. 1900 to present, there's one for pre-1450, there's one for 1450 to 1750, and one for the final period, 1750 to 1900. Make sure that you start with the 1900 to present section. That way, you'll be simultaneously reviewing for the unit test that's next week. If writing stuff down in your shower curtain doesn't feel like review, then you are not doing it right, and you should talk to me. How do you fill the 1900 to present portion? Well, the first thing you do is you got to read the study guide. That will help you see what College Board wants you to know about this time period. Even just looking at the big picture statements that they want you to keep in mind can be incredibly helpful. So start by reading that study guide from start to finish. Then consider what resources you can use to review the content. You could use your reading notes, your class notes, the sample review readings. You could also use the resources on kazanishistory.weebly.com. If you go and look at that website, there has been an added tab, End of Year Review 2023. Once you've considered and organized the kinds of materials that you already have on this unit, decide one method that you want to start with. It's not helpful to be trying to listen to videos and look at your reading notes and look at your class notes all at the same time. It can be kind of overwhelming. So I'd pick one method like the review reading or your reading notes. And then if you have time, you can go back with another resource and add, but start with one. Then you'll begin organizing, summarizing content in a meaningful and condensed way, filling the shower curtain with reminders about that content. You can do this in lots of different ways, in the form of notes, in the form of charts, mind maps, vocab, lists of key people, whatever you want. Just keep in mind that the process is more important than the product. As you summarize key content and write reminders about things you'd like to remember in writing, it will force you to interact with the material and you will be way more likely to remember it. There have been so many times when students came back from the AP test and they said, the only reason I was able to write that on an SIQ or an LEQ or a DBQ is because I could picture myself writing it on my shower curtain. While some of these photos show shower curtains from previous years when maybe the timing was slightly different, you can get an idea of what students did. Sometimes it's beautiful, sometimes it's really basic, but each time students tried to make the content meaningful to them. You can organize and summarize this content however you would like, but this box in particular must include the following things. It must have a timeline, one cohesive timeline of major developments and events from this time period. It must also include mention of the major regions we discussed, the relevant Spice Tea themes, social, political, cultural developments when they came up, and evidence of historical reasoning skills, like causes and consequences of the wars. It must also include the major focus areas from the study guide. So this is mentioned in the written instructions. It includes the world wars, the interwar years, developments within the communist states, etc. You want to make sure that you actually label and identify those areas somewhere in that box. Remember, by this point, you already have looked at the study guide, but it will remind you what kind of information you could include for each of these particular focus areas. For example, under developments within communist states, it gives you a reminder that you'll want to know things about Russia and China and Cambodia, for example. Every period is different, and you can make decisions based on your own personal preference, but I don't think that Spice Tea charts work very well for the 20th century. That doesn't mean that you can't still mention social, cultural, political changes as they happened and where they're relevant, but I wouldn't organize my content by regional spice charts. Rather, there's so much global interaction that I'd probably organize the content by the focus areas provided on the study guide. Keep in mind that the timeline should be one cohesive timeline, not numerous timelines spread out all over the place. And you should use the full length or width of the box for this because there's a lot to write down in the 20th century. Some people color code their timelines like red for Russian developments or blue for American. If you start trying to do that and you find that it's too complicated, don't worry if you change your mind. Sometimes when we look over the study guide, we get totally overwhelmed, but I probably just do this. Labeling a space for each of the focus areas and then saving some space for the timeline and then beginning my review, simply taking notes on those subjects as I review them is a super simple approach. So I did that here. I looked over the instructions. I looked over the study guide. I thought about the kinds of materials that I might want to use. And then I decided that I was going to create a label for each of those major focus areas. In the top left corner, I wrote World Wars, then I wrote the interwar years and Great Depression. Towards the right, I wrote the development of communism, reminded myself that I want to discuss Russia and China. I also saved space down at the bottom for a timeline. If you zoom in here, you can see what I did. And I can show this to you in class as well. Now, some of you get a little bit nervous doing this. You're thinking, what if the spacing doesn't work out? And that's always a possibility. It's okay if there's some spacing issues, like some of the writing is larger or smaller than maybe what you expected it to be, or if not everything goes according to plan. But make sure that you at least start by considering how you might want to organize that content, and make sure that there's at least some space dedicated to the focus areas that were mentioned, as well as some space allocated for a complete timeline. As I said earlier, keep in mind that copying is a waste of time. So if you're not thinking about what you're writing and summarizing it in a way that's meaningful to you, you are wasting your time. Don't just write down verbatim what you're seeing in your review book or somewhere else. Make sure that you are actually thinking about the content and reorganizing it in a meaningful way. Now, you're going to want to set a schedule and stick to it. In the written instructions, I said that you should set time limits for how much time you'll spend on each time period. Divide up the time you have and complete this in a workable way so that you're not missing sleep and stressing about this unnecessarily at the end. I recommend the following schedule. Working on 1900 to present up until maybe Tuesday night next week. That will take you through the period of studying for the unit test as well. Then the following week, I'd work on the period pre-1450. The following week after that, I'd work on 1450 to 1750. And in our final week, I'd work on the period 1750 to 1900. Ask yourself how much time is reasonable when you have a month to review this year's worth of content, and then make sure that your review fits within that time frame. So Parkinson's law is this old idea that work expands to fill the time which is available. It suggests that the more time you have for a task, sometimes the more time you take. So you're going to have to set limits for yourself. You do not want to spend like 200 hours on this. You want to spend a reasonable amount of time time each week. If I said that you had one class period to fill a whole portion of the whiteboard with content from the 20th century, you could do it in one class period. So it is possible to fit this into a reasonable time frame. Before you move on to the other time periods, again, make sure that I've assigned your shower curtain and then follow the instructions provided for each of the remaining areas. So for example, when you open up the pre-1450 time period, there are instructions for those areas, including what focus areas must be mentioned. My final suggestions are as follows. Don't worry about using every single AP World resource available. It's simply not possible. Pick something that works for you based on your needs and stick with it for a consistent period of time before making a change. If you're feeling like a perfectionist, you must avoid worrying about what you're missing and avoid constantly changing direction. Seek progress, not perfection. Avoid comparing your status to anything but your own status the day before. You can add more at the end if you have extra time, but do not get caught up on any one area. Also remember, there's no perfect way to do this. You do not have time to make this an artistic masterpiece. You should make it legible and you should make it accurate, but do not expend too much energy on the artistic aspect of this curtain. If you're not feeling like a perfectionist and you're just feeling like a procrastinator, well, force yourself to work on it for 5 minutes at a time. It will get easier once you've made progress. Regardless of where you're at, just start. Don't waste time worrying. Don't waste time complaining. And if at any point you're completely overwhelmed, ask me for help.